Everybody knows Nick Begich for being a scientist. I'm not going to go through all his degrees and his background and all his best-selling books exposing atmospheric manipulation, HAARP, and the thousands of patents. And he says, Alex, don't worry about the chemicals in the water. That's bad enough. It's the electromagnetic manipulation. And now it's being admitted. So this is being deployed against us. So he joins us now. But I wanted to ask him first, as a smart political brain, what he makes of Trump, his report card. I think he's starting to break the back so far of the swamp, beginning to drain it as all the revelations of illegal spying come out. I still think we're not out of the woods, but I think that people need to stay the course because I really see signs that Trump is strengthening and the globalists and their whole plan are weakening, and that humanity might have some hope, not just through Trump, but through all the nationalists and populists in your work, understanding there's a breakaway civilization, there's a technocracy, there is a system that is breaking away from us, and it doesn't want us to be involved in it. But if we're involved in it and just study it, then we can take control of it for the betterment of humanity, just like they didn't want global government being debated. They would say just 5 years ago didn't exist still. When you and I covered it, and you would be on with Art Bell or George Norrie, we get attacked for it. But now it's all out in the open. So I see that we've made giant leaps from where we were. And even though it seems like things are really bad now, if you look at how far we've come, I think we've come far enough in the awakening process that if we just keep pushing, it's going to get easier and easier and easier as we go. I think we've reached the top of the hill if humanity recognizes the chance and grabs at it. What do you say, Dr. Nick Begich of Earth Pulse?
I think it's true. The fact of the matter is, if the public now recognizes the power that they actually have in this equation for making change, for doing it differently, we have that opportunity right now. I mean, over 25 years ago, I started talking about this stuff and sort of where the trends were headed, and we are there. Unfortunately, we're like at 5 minutes to midnight once again, which seems to be always the case in American politics. We always wait sort of to the last minute. Now, when I look at sort of the conditioning and what's happening, you mentioned the social scoring that China is now doing. That really is part of the whole system right now across the globe. When you look at what China is doing, and then you look at their next door neighbor, India, in terms of facial recognition, fingerprints, I mean, all of the biometrics that are being instituted now just to get plugged into their banking system and into their system of social services, voting, et cetera. And they've done most of it. I mean, I think it's 1.1 billion people already, and more to come. The whole shift is more towards the elite. In fact, I have this conversation often with a lot of people. I don't think Trump is part of that elite. I think all of us know that, and there's a lot of people who would like to see him go. But look at the scorecard: lowest unemployment, highest stock market. People are coming to the tables, talking to America again. The trade agreements are out and being revitalized in America's interests. And I think the approach is certainly radically different than the past, and radically different is what America needed and what American citizens voted for. And we have it. And let's see what happens. In terms of the control aspect, social media has been in the news. It was engineered from the very beginning to have one purpose, and that is to move public opinion and control the culture. I mean, when you look at media across the board, people say, oh, it doesn't have such an effect. Yes, it does. It is.
And they act like it's a scandal when Trump and people do some public scraping just to reach out to folks, when that's like first grade math compared to quantum mechanics with what Facebook and the Democrats have been openly doing. It's such a joke when they go, we didn't know there was social engineering. Gee, how evil. They contacted people on Facebook that were public databases. How terrible. We need to control this, which means putting everybody that's a libertarian, a conservative, you name it, a pro-human person into an electronic gulag.
Right, and you look at, you're talking about putting spies in someone's campaign. This is exactly what was happening in the 1960s and early 70s here in the U.S. under the Hoover FBI, who was blackmailing half the Congress, really pushing a lot from that dark side of government. And it was Hale Boggs strongly opposing him up until the point in which he was finally out of there, out of the FBI. But the institution still had the same rot, the same structure, the same internal, sort of culture that had evolved under Hoover. That did not change. I don't think it's changed today. The idea that it's a political arm, think about this. We hear all this saber rattling about, for instance, intellectual property rights in China, as an example. But right here in the U.S., they don't defend our intellectual property rights whatsoever. They tell us to go to civil court. Unless you're Lucasfilms or Microsoft or someone like this, who's paying the money to run the government and to do the trade-offs, they get the laws enforced selectively for them. This is the nature of the 21st century. It is for the elites. It's no longer for you and I. And that's what's changed.
And you're really well-studied research. Obviously, you believe, and a lot of folks believe your father's plane was brought down as a U.S. congressman. Your brother's been a senator. You've been on the inside of a lot of big things, advised world leaders. At a gut level, what do you think of the deep state and their threats of violence intensifying?
There is a panic party going on, and they are worried. And they're worried about all of it unraveling. And this guy, as president, they just don't have the control. They didn't spend 50 years building his career in politics. He came in as an outsider, as a renegade, actually.
And we get that, and we don't care if he went out with a porn star. Exactly. We didn't hire him for that. We hired him as a wrecking ball. That's
exactly it. And I think that's what the American people wanted. And if you stop and think about it for a minute, even on the Democratic side, if Hillary hadn't rigged the thing, and they did rig the thing at the national level, and the evidence has shown that.
Bernie probably would have beaten Trump.
He probably would have, because once again, people wanted radical change, and they didn't care what it looked like, how people screamed about. They just want to know they weren't part of the existing power structure that has worked against us. And all around the country, I don't care whether you're a liberal, a conservative, or an independent, you have this sense of dis-ease, of discomfort, of just something about to happen, because it is. It is. It's 5 minutes to midnight. And here's the big dimension of it. Mind control as a concept is so clearly administered in the simplest of forms right now. And it's been done through programming, through television, through media for decades. Now, what has changed is you can actually monitor in real time what goes on in a human brain when you're broadcasting or when you're sending specific signals. And this is what has happened. Is so an entire evolution in the technology has happened where you get what's called a frequency following response. FFR, it's taught in every master's level institution that teaches psychology. And what it says is external signals can influence the internal activity in the brain and cause your emotional state to be shifted. This is the simplest thing, the simplest aspect of it, well over 20 years old. The things that you're reading about in today's paper about implants, this was pioneered years and years ago, and people forget that over 200 people in the AG's office in Mexico were implanted years and years ago, and people said, oh, it's to stop corruption. No, it was to maintain control over those who were corrupted. The idea of control is really what it's about. And the closer and the more that you see that instituted, it is the signal to the elites that this is coming. Because ideally, it's a game of bankers. It always has been. Go back to the very beginning of banking in Sumeria, and it was a king issuing little fiat forms of currency, and you paid the interest back in silver. Then it came into the Middle Ages. We had that banking system evolve, fractional lending.
And let's be clear, under feudalism, whether it was ancient Japan, ancient China, ancient Africa, ancient England, ancient France, ancient Austrian, Hungarian areas, the Visigoths and Ostrogoths, you had to have the tally sticks or the shells or the coins, or you'd be killed if you were trading rabbits or trading. There was no barter allowed under feudalism. You always heard about, oh, you're hunting the king's deer or whatever. If you caught fish and didn't do some tax, you were killed. So they always lust after this total control system, and the China celebrating their new social credit score, barring people from flying or working or living who don't act exactly like they want. The left is saying, let's adopt this here to control conservatives. Don't they get that once the thing's in place, they can always change the rules however they want for total control?
Right, and you're familiar, and I know we've discussed it before, you know, Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, which also laid this all out as an insider. You look at what he laid out in the early 70s, and it is happening right now.
Between Two Ages, the Technotronic era, he said it all.
Right. And
I remember my dad, when I was like 12, he said, you want to know how stuff works, son? You think Nundercall conspiracy is powerful. He goes, read this. This is from one of their main architects. And he admitted that the government brings in the drugs to control it, the child porn they control, the mind control. They were going to have a computer technocracy to control us. And their argument is, oh, we control the child porn so it doesn't get out of hand. As if anybody even wants that crap. It's the government and the UN pushing NAMBLA. Sorry, I'm ranting. It's just Brzezinski was so damn evil.
Well, and here's the thing. You know, when you look at what was constructed from his frame of thought, the Trilateral Commission, Foreign Affairs Journal, I actually read it every time it comes out. I'm on a subscription list because I want to know what the elite's plan is and where they're headed. I read a lot of publications that are out of areas that I consider like my area because I want to know. I want to know what's being planned, how it's being looked at, and how our lives are being constructed around us. We need to change the way we see the world for the world to change, and we need to see it more accurately. The mainstream is no longer a media outlet. Fake news, what a propaganda game. It is the fake news. It's all editorial. It is not information anymore that allows us to discern within a democratic republic what ought to shape our government. It's done the opposite turn. Freedom of the press was about an informed public so we could maintain control of this republic. And instead, we've got a propaganda machine operated by...
That's right, stay there. It's all admitted. They're putting brain chips in troops. World government's here, can't buy or sell if you're not a good globalist. Robot cars killing people all over. Al Gore saying exterminate. Mainstream news saying cell towers can manipulate your brain. I mean, this is just, it's all here. And instead of people going, oh, Nick Begich and Alex Jones were right, it's like, they're even worse, screw them. It's just quite a paradigm, Dr. Begich. Go ahead.
You're right, that's exactly it. And, you know, when you think about the things the mainstream is now reporting, if you go back to a really important article, it was 1998, now 20 years old, and it was called The Mind Has No Firewalls. And it was a reprint from an article that was originally in a Russian journal called Orienteer, a military journal. And what it talked about, and was later absolutely supported in mainstream reports within the United States and academic studies, was the idea that any electromagnetic carrier, any system that can carry a signal, can carry a signal, a signal on it that allows you to manipulate the behavior of people within contact of that signal. Now, what can be used is the internet, telephone, radio networks, power grids, any of the things that essentially carry a part of the electromagnetic spectrum that you can manipulate. And so this is essentially what has happened. Now, the idea of being able to have a more targeted effect rather than affecting general populations, this is possible using cell phone systems that then are actually tagging a specific individual who can be linked into that system. So when you think of surveillance, don't just think about the idea of looking at what you're doing, but also beginning now, and has been for some time, influencing what you're doing. Now, when you look in real time at brain activity, for instance, in the gaming industry, when games are being evolved, Facebook and the way it operates, virtually all of these electronic interfaces are monitored because the objective of the inventors is to make you come back. And that means they want to trigger the portions of your brain associated with two things: drug addiction and orgasm, sexual activity, the things that will make your brain come back to those same sources to get that charge again, to get that dopamine release again, to get serotonin levels changed. All of these chemical changes occur by the energetic changes. This is called biophysics. It is what the science tells us.
Our brains are electrochemical. They admitted 20 years ago cell phones break the DNA. They admit they're doubling brain tumors.
Right. And again, this is not something new. There was a major initiative in this back in the early part of the current century. And we participated in that in the European Parliament in testifying about these technologies. They went on the basis of the book Earthrising the Revolution, which actually a lot of it made it into their record because they used it as a reference source because there were over 600 sources. It made it really easy for people to look at the subject matter. And that's been our hallmark all along. These aren't just arbitrary predictions. They're based on what's in the published literature and what we know today. We are indeed at that threshold.
So this is a system to program our brains while they're killing us. It's all admitted. But who's in control of it? Who's at the bottom of the rabbit hole?
I think it's a layer below most of the political leadership, quite frankly. I think most of the political leadership are rolled in and out as long as...
No, I agree. It's what Eisenhower said. He said the technological elite in control of the military-industrial complex.
And this is exactly who it is. So you look at who are those today? It's the Microsoft, it's the Googles, it's also the traditional industrialists of the past that represent the military-industrial complex, and the pharmaceutical academic.
And their argument is the Chinese are going to get all this. We've got to have better mind control. But of course, it's going to end up being used on everybody.
This is already happening. And it's the Chinese certainly have investigated all of this. It even comes through on what little comes out of China. But they're doing it on a level that is going to be the model, I would say.
That's right. They call it Skynet, the real name of the social score system that tracks everything you do and then controls you with it. They call it Skynet.
Yeah, and you're going to see the extension of this. I mean, I see the BRIC, you know, what's happening there between Russia, India, South Africa, Brazil, China. A lot of that is economic, but the economic overlay always has a social overlay. And what people know in the world today is 2 to 4 billion people are coming into the middle class in the next 20 years globally. And the elites want the same kind of gains, only now they really want the controls because democratic republics do not serve the interest of elites. What countries need to do is take their sovereignty back, starting with their economics, starting with their currency.
Exactly, and say we want a new social contract admitting all this and not having a global race towards dehumanization, but a global race towards human empowerment.
That's right, and I hope that the secrecy syndrome that has dominated the planet begins to again be chiseled away by Donald Trump. I hope he has the courage to do it. It's long overdue. The public can handle the truth. And we need the truth to reform the system.
They crave it.
In a vacuum.
The public craves the truth.
Absolutely. That's what the whole thing has been the last 4 years, leading into the last presidential election and coming out of it. Everyone wants it. If you look at the mainstream even, where do they get their highest ratings? When those little bitty increments of something that actually matters manages to make it.
No, I agree. So let me ask you this question. The left used to be mean well that they were manipulated, just like the right is. But now they've weaponized the left so much, like piranhas out there. They almost seem like possessed. And it's the social media. It's the incremental fake bots that they think are real people telling them what to do. I mean, I don't want to get into like voodoo here, but it's like they've been possessed.
It is a type of mind control, quite frankly, and it's intended to do that. It's intended to incite your emotions around specific ideas that are being shoved into you based on your preferences that are easily discernible today. This is programming. We need a digital.
That's right. They get your number with the social media. They know you're 1,000 times beyond the Minnesota multiphasic. They know your absolute type, and then they know how to target it. It's unbelievable. We'll be right back as we battle for human consciousness with Dr. Nick Begich of EarthPulse.com. Stay with us. You just saw a short excerpt of the full interview we did with this notable awakened human. If you want to see the full unedited interview, go to InfoWars Interviews online.